The stagecoach door burst open and Eleanor Price stumbled into a nightmare. Where a thriving silver town should have stood, only mud and death remained. Her fiancé's letters promised prosperity, but Henry Blackwell was buried beneath tons of earth, along with her dreams of a new life. Then she met Caleb Mercer, a scarred Texas Ranger who warned her, "This wasn't nature's doing, ma'am. Someone murdered this whole town." Welcome to my story. Comment below where you're watching from. Let's see how far this tale travels. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the weathered stagecoach as it lurched to a stop at what should have been the edge of Silvervale. Eleanor Price pressed her face against the dusty window, her heart hammering against her corset stays. This couldn't be right. The driver must have taken a wrong turn somewhere in the desert. "End of the line, miss," the driver called out, his voice rough as sandpaper. "What's left of Silvervale, anyway?" Eleanor's gloved fingers trembled as she gathered her traveling dress and pushed open the coach door. The sight that greeted her stole the breath from her lungs. Where Henry's letters had described a bustling mining town with a main street lined with shops, saloons, and a new church with a bell tower, there was only devastation. Half the valley lay buried under a massive slide of mud and rocks that had cascaded down from the mountains like God's own fist had struck the earth. "Dear Lord," she whispered, clutching Henry's latest letter to her chest. The paper, worn soft from constant reading during the 3-week journey from Boston, crinkled under her grip. The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man named Walt, climbed down and began unloading her trunk. "Happened 2 weeks back during the spring rains. Whole mountainside just gave way in the middle of the night. They say it sounded like thunder that wouldn't stop. But Henry, Mr. Blackwell wrote me just last month. He said the town was growing, that he'd secured us a house near the church." Eleanor's voice cracked on the last word. Where the church should have stood, she could see only the tip of a bell tower poking through the dried mud like a gravestone. Henry Blackwell. Walt's weathered face softened with something that might have been pity. "Mining foreman at the Silver Hope?" Eleanor nodded, unable to trust her voice. "Miss, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the Silver Hope mine was right in the path of the slide. They've been digging for survivors, but—" He shook his head slowly. "Ain't found nobody alive from that section. Most of the miners were sleeping in the company housing up near the mine entrance. It's all gone now." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Eleanor reached out to steady herself against the coach wheel, her vision blurring. She'd sold everything she owned in Boston, endured the scandal of becoming a mail-order bride, faced her family's disapproval, all for the promise of a new life with a man she'd never met but had grown to care for through his tender, thoughtful letters. "Miss, you got folks you can go back to?" Walt asked gently. "Next coach heading east don't come through for another week, but there's a boarding house still standing on the south end of town. Mrs. Chen runs it clean and honest." "Go back? To what?" Eleanor straightened her spine, a trait inherited from her grandmother who'd survived the British burning of Washington. "My fare was one way, Mr. Walt, and I've come too far to turn back now." The driver studied her for a long moment, then nodded with something like respect. "Town's that way?" He pointed toward a cluster of buildings that had survived on higher ground. "Watch yourself, miss. Disaster brings out the best in some folk, but it surely brings out the worst in others." Eleanor picked up her carpet bag with one hand and grabbed the handle of her trunk with the other. The weight of it made her arms shake, but she'd be damned if she'd show weakness now, not when everything she'd planned for lay buried under tons of mud and rock. The walk into what remained of Silvervale felt like entering a graveyard. Debris littered the street, broken furniture, twisted metal from the mine equipment, personal belongings caked in dried mud. A child's porcelain doll stared up at her with one blue eye, the other lost to the disaster. Eleanor stepped carefully around it, her button boots slipping on the loose stones. The survivors moved through the ruins like ghosts. Men with hollow eyes dug through the debris with shovels and bare hands. Women in mud-stained dresses sorted through salvaged goods. Children sat silent in the dust, their usual play forgotten in the face of such devastation. "You lost, ma'am?" Eleanor turned to find a tall man watching her from the doorway of what appeared to be the general store, one of the few buildings still intact. His face bore the kind of deep tan that came from years under the desert sun, but it was the scar running from his left temple to his jaw that drew her attention. That and the worn Texas Ranger badge pinned to his vest, though it looked tarnished and neglected. "I'm looking for information about Henry Blackwell," she said, lifting her chin. "I'm Eleanor Price. His fiancée." The man's gray eyes, the color of storm clouds over the desert, widened slightly. He stepped out of the doorway, and Eleanor noticed the slight limp in his gait, the way his left hand rested on the Colt .45 at his hip, as if it were a natural extension of his body. "Caleb Mercer," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Former Ranger, current. Well, I suppose you could say I'm keeping the peace in what's left of this place." His expression softened. "You came all the way from back east." "Boston," Eleanor confirmed. "Henry and I have been corresponding for 6 months. We were to be married this Sunday." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Miss Price, I think you better come inside. We need to talk." The interior of the general store was dim and cluttered. Salvaged goods were piled everywhere. Water-damaged flour sacks, dented canned goods, tools caked with mud. Behind the counter, an elderly Chinese man sorted through a box of bent nails, straightening them one by one with patient concentration. "Mr. Chen," Caleb called out. "Can you fetch the lady some water?" The old man nodded and disappeared into a back room. Caleb gestured to a chair near the window, but Eleanor remained standing. "Just tell me straight, Mr. Mercer. Is Henry dead?" "We don't know for certain," Caleb said carefully. "The mine entrance is completely blocked. We've been digging, but the mud's unstable. Every time we make progress, more slides down. We've recovered some bodies, but not all. Not Henry's." "Then there's hope?" Caleb's silence was answer enough. Mr. Chen returned with a glass of water, which Eleanor accepted gratefully. The cool liquid helped steady her nerves. "Miss Price," Caleb began, then seemed to reconsider his words. "How well did you know Henry?" "We never met in person, if that's what you're asking. But through his letters, I felt I knew his heart. He was kind, thoughtful, ambitious. He wrote about his plans for the mine, for our future. He'd been promoted to foreman just 3 months ago." "Did he mention anything unusual in his recent letters? Any troubles at the mine? Problems with anyone in town?" Eleanor frowned. "Why would you ask that?" Before Caleb could answer, the store door banged open. 3 men entered, bringing with them the stench of whiskey and unwashed bodies. The one in front, a thick-set man with cruel eyes and a week's worth of stubble, scanned the store until his gaze landed on Eleanor. "Well, well," he drawled. "What have we here? Don't recall seeing you before the slide, pretty lady." "The lady's just arrived," Caleb said evenly, his hand drifting to his gun. "And she's had a hard day, Murphy." "Why don't you boys move along?" Luke Murphy grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Just being neighborly, Mercer. Wanting to welcome the newcomer proper-like." He took a step toward Eleanor. "You got business in Silvervale, miss? Because if you're looking for opportunity, I might have some propositions for you." Eleanor felt her skin crawl, but before she could respond, Caleb stepped between them. "The lady's business is her own. And you've got no propositions worth hearing. Now get out." Murphy's eyes narrowed. "You ain't a ranger no more, Mercer. That badge don't mean nothing here." "Maybe not," Caleb agreed, his voice deadly quiet. "But this Colt still works just fine." The tension in the room stretched taut as a bowstring. Murphy's companions shifted nervously, hands hovering near their weapons. Eleanor held her breath, her fingers tightening on the water glass. Finally, Murphy stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "No need for unpleasantness. We're all just trying to survive here, ain't we?" He tipped his hat to Eleanor, the gesture somehow making her feel more threatened than comforted. "Ma'am, when you realize this broken-down lawman can't help you, you come find me. I'm staying at what's left of the Imperial Hotel. Ask anyone." After they left, Eleanor released the breath she'd been holding. "Who was that?" "Luke Murphy. Came to town about a month before the slide, claiming to be a businessman from San Francisco. But I've seen his type before. Vultures circling dying towns, looking to pick the bones clean." Caleb turned to face her fully. "Which brings me back to my question. Did Henry mention any troubles?" Eleanor set down her water glass and retrieved a bundle of letters from her carpet bag. These are all his letters. The last one, she shuffled through them, was dated 3 weeks ago. He mentioned that some new investors had been sniffing around the mine, asking questions about ore yields and land rights. He didn't seem concerned, just said it was good that people saw the potential in Silvervale. Caleb took the letter she offered, scanning it quickly. These investors have names? He didn't say. Why? What aren't you telling me? Caleb handed back the letter. Maybe nothing. Maybe something. There have been disputes over mining claims throughout the territory. Men have died for less than what the Silver Hope was pulling out of the ground. You're suggesting someone caused the mudslide. Eleanor's voice rose in disbelief. That's impossible. You can't just make a mountain fall. Can't you? Caleb moved to the window, gazing out at the devastation. You can if you know where to place dynamite. If you weaken the right spots during the rainy season. If you're willing to murder a whole town to get what you want. Eleanor sank into the chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. But that would be monstrous. Yes, ma'am, it would be. She looked up at him, this scarred former lawman with tired eyes and a voice full of bitter knowledge. Do you have proof? Not yet. Been asking questions, poking around. Murphy and his boys don't like it. Neither do some others who've shown up since the slide, waving papers and claiming rights to abandoned properties. Like vultures, Eleanor murmured, echoing his earlier words. Exactly like vultures. Eleanor stood, decision crystallizing in her mind. Where was Henry staying? His house, I mean. The one he wrote about. Miss Price, I don't think, Mr. Mercer. She drew herself up to her full height, which still left her a head shorter than him. I've come 2,000 miles to marry a man who may be dead. I've lost everything I had in Boston, my position as a governess, my reputation, my family's respect. I have exactly $17 to my name and no return ticket. If Henry is truly gone, then I need to know what happened to him. And if someone murdered him and all those others, then by God, I'm going to see justice done. Now, will you show me to his house, or do I need to find it myself? A ghost of a smile crossed Caleb's weathered features. You always this stubborn, Miss Price? My grandmother used to say I could teach rocks about being hard-headed. All right, then. Caleb grabbed his hat from a peg by the door. Henry's place is on the edge of the damaged area. Part of it's still standing, but I warn you, it's not pretty. They walked through the ruins as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountains. Caleb pointed out landmarks as they went, where the bank had stood, the sheriff's office. The sheriff himself was among the missing. The schoolhouse where 16 children and their teacher had died. How many? Eleanor asked quietly. Last count was 73 confirmed dead, 42 still missing. Town had about 300 souls before the slide. They passed a makeshift medical tent where a haggard doctor tended to injured survivors. A woman sat outside, cradling what looked like a bundle of clothes, until Eleanor realized it was an infant, far too still and quiet. The youngest victim was 3 days old, Caleb said softly, born the night before the slide. Eleanor blinked back tears. She'd been so focused on her own loss, she hadn't fully grasped the scope of the tragedy. Henry's house sat on what had been Oak Street, though no oaks remained standing. The front portion of the small wooden structure had been crushed by debris, but the back rooms remained intact. The front door hung at an odd angle, and mud had flooded the parlor to knee-height before drying into a concrete-like crust. He was proud of this place, Eleanor said, recognizing details from Henry's descriptions. Said it had real glass windows and a wood floor instead of dirt. They picked their way through the ruined parlor to the back of the house. Henry's bedroom was relatively untouched, though dust and mud had filtered through cracks in the walls. The bed was neatly made with a colorful quilt that looked hand-stitched. A daguerreotype of an older couple, likely Henry's parents, sat on the nightstand beside a Bible. Eleanor moved to the small desk under the window. Papers were scattered across its surface, mining reports, correspondence, maps. She began sorting through them while Caleb examined the rest of the room. Look at this, she said, holding up a surveyor's map. These are the original boundary lines for the Silver Hope claim. Caleb studied the map over her shoulder. She caught a whiff of leather and gunpowder, oddly comforting in their masculinity. See these markings? He pointed to several X marks along the boundary. Those weren't part of the original survey. Eleanor found another paper, this one a letter from the Territorial Assay Office. This says they found a new vein last month, high-grade silver ore, possibly the richest strike in the territory. That would be worth killing for, Caleb muttered. If someone knew about it, wanted the mine for themselves. A floorboard creaked in the front room. Caleb spun, gun drawn before Eleanor could blink. He motioned for her to stay quiet, then crept toward the doorway. "Just me, Ranger," a voice called out. "Brian Turner." Caleb lowered his gun but didn't holster it. A thin man with nervous eyes appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "Miss Price? I heard you'd arrived. I was Henry's assistant foreman at the mine." "Mr. Turner." Eleanor stood, smoothing her skirts. "Did you survive the slide?" "I was in town that night, thank the Lord. At the saloon, I'm ashamed to say. If I'd been at the mine," he shuddered, "I'd be dead with the rest." "Mr. Turner, did Henry mention any concerns about the mine, any threats?" Caleb asked. Turner's eyes darted between them. "Henry was a good man, kept things close to the vest. But," he hesitated. "Please," Eleanor urged. "Anything might help. There was a man." Edward Harland owned the Compass Rose mine 2 valleys over. His claim was playing out, and he'd been making offers on the Silver Hope. Henry refused to sell, of course. It wasn't his to sell, belonged to the company. But Harland was persistent. Got angry when Henry showed him the door last time. "When was this?" Caleb asked. "About 2 weeks before the slide. Maybe less." "Where's Harland now?" Turner shrugged. "Haven't seen him since the disaster. Probably counting his blessings he wasn't here when it happened. Or counting his profits, Eleanor thought, but didn't say. After Turner left, they continued searching the house. In a drawer, Eleanor found more letters, these from the mining company's head office in San Francisco. The most recent one made her gasp. They were promoting Henry to general manager of all the company's Arizona operations. He would have been leaving Silvervale in another month. Caleb read the letter, frowning. So whoever wanted the mine had to act fast before Henry left and took his knowledge with him. Or before he could report whatever he'd discovered, Eleanor added. She held up another paper. "This is a draft of a letter to the U.S. Marshal's office. Henry was requesting an investigation into what he calls irregularities and threats against the lawful operation of the Silver Hope mine. He never got to send it," Caleb said grimly. As the sun began to set, painting the devastated valley in shades of red and gold, they prepared to leave. Eleanor paused at the bedroom door, looking back at the life Henry had been building for them. The quilt on the bed would have kept them warm through desert nights. The desk where he'd written his letters to her would have been where she might have written to her sister back in Boston, telling her about this strange, wild, beautiful land. "I'm sorry," Caleb said quietly. "This isn't the welcome you deserved." Eleanor lifted her chin, finding strength in her spine she didn't know existed. "Henry deserves justice. They all do. Those children in the schoolhouse, that baby, all of them. That's a dangerous path you're talking about walking. Then it's fortunate I've found myself in the company of a lawman." "Former lawman," Caleb corrected. "I lost my commission 2 years ago." Eleanor waited, but he didn't elaborate. "Well, Mr. Former Lawman, someone needs to stand for the dead. Might as well be us." They made their way back toward town as darkness began to fall. Cooking fires dotted the surviving section of Silvervale, and the smell of beans and coffee drifted on the evening air. It was such a normal smell, so at odds with the devastation surrounding them. "You'll need a place to stay," Caleb said. "Mrs. Chen's boarding house is respectable, like Walt said. I'll walk you there." "And then?" "Then I'm going to have a drink and think about what we found. Murphy's been too interested in the mine site, keeps trying to get work crews together to clear the entrance. Says it's for rescue efforts, but it's been 2 weeks. Anyone trapped in there is long dead." The boarding house was a 2-story adobe building that had weathered the disaster with minimal damage. Mrs. Chen, a small woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled into a tight bun, greeted them at the door. "You need a room, miss." "Yes, please. I don't know for how long. Week by week is fine. $2. Includes breakfast, and supper. Lunch you're on your own. Eleanor counted out the money from her small purse, acutely aware of how little remained. I'll put you in the back room, second floor, Mrs. Chen said, then looked at Caleb. You staying for supper, Ranger Mercer? Not tonight, ma'am. He touched his hat to Eleanor. Miss Price, I'll come by in the morning. Don't go wandering alone, especially at night. Murphy's not the only wolf prowling these ruins. After he left, Mrs. Chen showed Eleanor to her room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and single window overlooking what had once been the town's garden. Now it was a mud flat with broken vegetables poking through like bones. You're Henry Blackwell's intended, Mrs. Chen said. It wasn't a question. I was. I suppose I'm nothing now. Mrs. Chen studied her with dark, knowing eyes. In my country, we say tragedy doesn't make us into nothing. It shows us what we truly are. You'll find out soon enough what that is for you. Alone in the room, Eleanor sat on the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. She cried for Henry, whom she'd never met but had allowed herself to love through his words. She cried for the children in the schoolhouse, for the baby who'd lived only 3 days, for the dreams buried under tons of mud and rock. When the tears finally stopped, she rose and washed her face in the basin. Looking in the small mirror, she barely recognized herself. The proper Boston governess was gone. The woman staring back at her had wild eyes and dusty hair, dirt under her fingernails and steel in her spine. She retrieved Henry's letters from her bag and spread them on the bed, reading them by lamplight with new eyes. Now she looked for clues, hints of the danger he'd been facing. In a letter from 2 months ago, he'd written, "The territory is full of hard men, Eleanor, but I've faced them down before. A man who has right on his side doesn't need to fear those who trade in darkness." "But they traded your life anyway, didn't they?" she whispered to the letters. A knock at her door made her jump. "Yes?" "Supper's ready, miss," came Mrs. Chen's voice. The dining room held a long table where about a dozen people sat eating quietly. Eleanor recognized the doctor from the medical tent, still in his blood-stained shirt. A few miners with bandaged hands and heads. A woman with 2 young children who ate mechanically, their eyes vacant with grief. Eleanor took an empty seat and accepted the bowl of beans and cornbread Mrs. Chen offered. The food was simple but good, flavored with chilies that made her eyes water. "You're the one came for Henry Blackwell," the man beside her said. He was older with silver threading through his beard. "Name's Josiah Wells. I worked the Silver Hope for 3 years. Eleanor Price. Did you know Henry well?" "Well enough. Good man. Fair. Didn't take bribes like some foremen. Didn't short the men on their wages. That made him enemies." "What kind of enemies?" Josiah lowered his voice. "The kind that don't like honest men. There's been talk, you know, about the slide." "What kind of talk?" "The kind that gets people killed if they speak it too loud." He concentrated on his beans for a moment. "But I'll tell you this. I was supposed to work that night, but Henry sent me home. Said I looked tired, needed rest. He'd never done that before. Almost like he knew something was coming. Before Eleanor could respond, the dining room door burst open. Murphy stood there with 2 of his men, whiskey thick on their breath. "Well, ain't this cozy?" Murphy slurred. "All the survivors having a nice meal while the rest rot in the mud." "You're drunk, Murphy," the doctor said tiredly. "Go sleep it off." "I'll go where I please, Sawbones." Murphy's eyes found Eleanor. "There's the pretty newcomer." "You think about my offer, sweetheart? Town like this, woman needs protection." Eleanor stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "Mr. Murphy, I neither want nor need your protection. Please leave." Murphy's face darkened. "High and mighty for someone with nothing. Your man's dead, girlie. Dead and buried. But I'm alive and I'm going to own this town once the dust settles. You'd be smart to—" He never finished the sentence. Caleb appeared behind him, pressing the barrel of his Colt into Murphy's kidney. "The lady asked you to leave," Caleb said conversationally. "I'd listen if I were you." "You pulled a gun on me, Mercer," Murphy snarled. "There'll be a reckoning for this." "Looking forward to it. Now move." Murphy and his men left, but not before Murphy shot Eleanor a look that promised this wasn't over. The dining room remained silent for a long moment after they'd gone. "Thank you," Eleanor said to Caleb. "Told you not to wander alone." That applies to dining rooms too, apparently. He looked tired, she noticed. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from carrying too much weight for too long. "Join us," Mrs. Chen said, already fetching another bowl. "You need to eat." Caleb sat beside Eleanor, and conversation slowly resumed around the table. She was acutely aware of his presence, the controlled way he moved, the constant vigilance in his eyes, even as he ate. "I sent a telegraph to the U.S. Marshal's office," he said quietly, "about what we found in Henry's papers. It'll take time for them to respond, if they do at all. And until then? Until then, we keep digging, literally and figuratively." After supper, Caleb walked Eleanor back to her room despite her protests that it was only up the stairs. "Murphy's type doesn't respect boundaries," he said. "Lock your door, put the chair under the handle. You really think he'd—" "I think he's desperate and drunk, which makes him unpredictable. Just be careful." Standing in her doorway, Eleanor studied this strange, scarred man who'd appointed himself her protector. "Why are you helping me?" "You don't know me." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe because Henry was one of the good ones, and there aren't enough of those left. Maybe because you remind me of someone. Or maybe because I've got nothing better to do in this dead town than irritate Luke Murphy." "Who did I remind you of?" His jaw tightened. "Someone who deserved better than she got." "Good night, Miss Price." Eleanor locked her door and wedged the chair under the handle as instructed. She lay in the narrow bed, fully clothed, listening to the sounds of the broken town. Somewhere, a woman wept. A dog barked. Men's voices rose in argument from the saloon down the street. She must have dozed because she woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. They paused outside her door. The handle turned slowly, met the resistance of the lock. The footsteps moved on, but Eleanor remained awake, heart pounding, until dawnlight crept through her window. When she finally emerged, she found Caleb waiting in the dining room, talking quietly with Mrs. Chen over coffee. "Trouble?" he asked, seeing her face. "Someone tried my door last night." Caleb's expression darkened. "What time?" "Around 2, I think. Murphy was passed out drunk by then. I made sure of it." "Then who?" "Good question." He stood. "Get some breakfast. Then we're going to the mine." "But you said it was buried." "The main entrance is, but Henry was smart. In one of those mining reports, he mentioned an old ventilation shaft from the original dig. If it's still accessible." Eleanor's heart leaped. He could have survived? "Don't get your hopes up. Even if the shaft's clear, the chances are slim, but it's worth checking." They set out after breakfast, joined by Josiah Wells and 2 other miners who'd overheard their conversation. The path to the mine was treacherous, winding through debris fields and unstable ground. The mountain loomed above them, tons of earth and rock that had come down like God's judgment. The main mine entrance was completely blocked, as Caleb had said. Work crews had made some progress clearing it, but Eleanor could see it would take weeks, maybe months, to dig through. "The ventilation shaft's up this way," Josiah said, leading them up a narrow trail. They climbed for 20 minutes before reaching a small opening in the mountainside, partially concealed by scrub brush. It was barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. "I'll go," one of the younger miners said. "No." Caleb checked his gun. "I'll go. If there's danger, I'm armed." He disappeared into the darkness. Eleanor waited, hardly breathing. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then Caleb's voice echoed from inside. "Someone get me a lantern and rope. Now!" The miners scrambled to comply. Eleanor pressed forward. "What did you find?" Caleb emerged, his face grim. "The shaft connects to the main tunnel about 30 feet in. It's clear, but—" He looked at Eleanor. "There are bodies. And something else." "What?" "Evidence of explosives, blast patterns on the walls. This wasn't a natural slide." Eleanor felt her knees go weak. Josiah caught her arm, steadying her. "Murder," she whispered. "It was murder. And we're going to prove it." The rope burned through Eleanor's gloves as she helped lower Caleb back into the ventilation shaft with a proper lantern this time. The other miners rigged a pulley system using equipment salvaged from the debris field, their movements efficient despite the grim nature of their task. Eleanor watched the rope disappear foot by foot into the darkness, her heart pounding with each passing second. "Found something," Caleb's voice echoed up from below, distorted by the rocky walls. "Pull me up." When he emerged, his face was covered in dust and something darker, soot from explosive residue. In his hand, he held a piece of twisted metal that Eleanor recognized as a blasting cap, the kind used in controlled mine explosions. "This was wedged in a crevice about 40 feet down," he said, turning the evidence over in his hands. "But that's not all. There are tool marks on the walls. Someone widened certain sections of the shaft recently. They were creating weak points. Josiah Wells spat tobacco juice onto the ground. Bastards knew exactly what they were doing. You weaken the right spots during the rainy season, and the whole mountainside becomes unstable." "We need to document this," Eleanor said, her governess instincts taking over. "Make drawings, take measurements, build a case that no one can dismiss." Caleb nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. Josiah, can you and the boys map out the blast patterns while there's still daylight?" As the miners set to work, Caleb led Eleanor away from the shaft entrance. They found a flat rock to sit on, overlooking the valley below. The devastation was even more apparent from this height. The mudslide had carved a path of destruction nearly a quarter-mile wide. "There's something else," Caleb said quietly. "I found Henry's compass down there, the one his father gave him. You mentioned it in his letters." Eleanor's breath caught as he placed the brass compass in her palm. It was tarnished and dented but intact, the initials HB still visible on the back. He never would have left this behind voluntarily. No, he wouldn't have, which means he was likely in the mine when the explosions went off. Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something difficult. Did Henry have any life insurance? Any policies that would pay out upon his death?" The question stung, but she understood its importance. "He mentioned taking out a policy when we became engaged. Said he wanted to ensure I'd be provided for if anything happened. But it was with a company in San Francisco, and I'm not the beneficiary yet. We weren't married." "Then who is?" Eleanor thought back to Henry's letters. "His sister in Colorado, I believe, Mary Blackwell. But she's a schoolteacher, hardly the type to orchestrate mass murder for insurance money. Still worth checking." Caleb stood, scanning the mountainside. "We should head back before dark. Tomorrow, I want to search the land records office, or what's left of it. If someone wanted the mine badly enough to kill for it, they'd need legal claim to it afterward." The journey down was treacherous in the fading light. Eleanor's boots, designed for Boston's cobblestone streets, struggled to find purchase on the loose rocks. More than once, Caleb's steady hand kept her from falling. She tried not to notice how his touch lingered a moment longer than necessary, or how her pulse quickened at the contact. They were nearly to the bottom when they heard horses approaching fast. Caleb pushed Eleanor behind a large boulder, his gun already drawn. 3 riders thundered past on the trail below, heading toward town. Eleanor caught a glimpse of the lead rider, a well-dressed man she didn't recognize, wearing a city suit entirely inappropriate for the territory. "Trouble?" she whispered. "Maybe. That's Charles Worthington, represents some mining consortium out of Philadelphia. He arrived yesterday claiming to be looking for investment opportunities. In a destroyed town." "That's what I wondered." They waited until the riders were well past before continuing to town. The main street was busier than Eleanor had yet seen it, with people gathering in small groups, voices raised in animated discussion. "Mrs." Chen stood outside her boarding house, wringing her hands. "What's happened?" Eleanor asked. "That man, Worthington," Mrs. Chen said. "He says he has papers. Legal claim to several mines, including the Silver Hope. Says he bought them months ago, before the disaster." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible. Henry would have told me if the mine was being sold." "Unless Henry didn't know," Caleb said grimly. "Where's Worthington now?" "At the saloon, holding court. Murphy's with him." The saloon was one of the few buildings that had survived mostly intact, though its mirror behind the bar was cracked in a spiderweb pattern that reflected the lamplight in fractured rainbows. When Eleanor and Caleb entered, conversation stopped. The air was thick with smoke and tension. Worthington stood at the bar, a sheaf of papers spread before him. He was younger than Eleanor had expected, perhaps 35, with carefully waxed mustache and soft hands that had never held a pickaxe. Murphy flanked him like a guard dog, eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "Ah, the former ranger," Worthington said smoothly. "And you must be Miss Price. I heard about your unfortunate situation. Please accept my condolences." "Save them," Eleanor said, surprising herself with her boldness. "What's this about owning the Silver Hope?" Worthington produced a document with an official-looking seal, a legitimate bill of sale signed by the previous owner 3 months ago. The mine and all its assets belong to the Philadelphia Mining Consortium, which I represent. The previous owner was the Morrison Mining Company in San Francisco, Caleb said. I find it hard to believe they'd sell their most profitable operation without informing their foreman. Business decisions aren't always communicated down the chain of command immediately, Worthington replied. The transaction was to be finalized this month. The unfortunate disaster doesn't change the legal ownership. Eleanor stepped forward, her mind racing. If you owned the mine, why wasn't Henry informed? Why did he continue sending reports to San Francisco? An oversight, perhaps. Or perhaps Mr. Blackwell was being kept in the dark for reasons known only to the Morrison Company. Worthington's smile was cold. Regardless, the law is clear. The mine belongs to us now. Convenient that all the people who could dispute that are dead, Caleb observed. Murphy's hand moved to his gun. You suggesting something, Mercer? Just making an observation. Eleanor noticed something about the document Worthington held. May I see that? Worthington hesitated, then handed it over with exaggerated courtesy. Of course, though I doubt a governess from Boston is familiar with mining law. Eleanor ignored the insult, studying the document carefully. Her father had been a clerk in a law office before he died, and she'd learned to read legal documents by helping him copy briefs in the evenings. Something about this one felt wrong. This seal, she said slowly, it's supposed to be from the territorial office in Prescott? Correct. But the territorial seal was changed 6 months ago when the new governor took office. This is the old seal. Worthington's smile faltered for just a moment. You must be mistaken. I'm not. Henry sent me a letter with the new seal just 2 months ago when he filed our marriage intentions with the territory. She pulled the letter from her bag, comparing the seals. See? They're completely different. The saloon erupted in murmurs. Several men pressed closer to see the documents. Worthington's face flushed red. This proves nothing, he said, snatching back his paper. Clerical errors happen. The sale is legitimate. Then you won't mind if we telegraph the Morrison Company to confirm? Caleb suggested. The telegraph lines are down, Murphy said quickly. Too quickly. Funny, I sent a message just this morning, Caleb replied. Lines were repaired yesterday. Worthington gathered his papers. This is ridiculous. I have legal claim, and I intend to begin salvage operations immediately. Any interference will be met with appropriate force. Whose force? Eleanor asked. Mr. Murphy's? How much are you paying him to intimidate the survivors? Murphy stepped toward her, but Caleb moved faster, positioning himself between them. Touch her, and it'll be the last thing you do. You can't fight all of us, Mercer, Murphy growled. You're just one broken-down ranger with a tarnished badge. Maybe, but I can sure as hell take you with me. The tension in the saloon stretched taut enough to snap. Eleanor counted at least 6 men who seemed aligned with Murphy and Worthington, their hands hovering near weapons. But she also noticed others, miners, shopkeepers, survivors, watching with angry eyes. They'd lost everything in the slide, and now outsiders were trying to profit from their tragedy. Old Josiah Wells broke the silence. Seems to me we should wait for the marshal's response before anyone starts claiming anything. That's the law, ain't it? The law, Worthington said with contempt. The law is what men with power say it is. Not in America, Eleanor said firmly. Here, the law belongs to everyone, even dead minors, even mail-order brides with nothing to their names. Several men nodded agreement. Worthington realized he was losing the room. "We'll see about that," he said coldly. "Murphy, we're leaving." After they left, the saloon gradually returned to normal conversation, though Eleanor could feel the undercurrent of unease. She and Caleb found a corner table where they could watch the door. "That was dangerous," Caleb said quietly. "You just made yourself a target." "I was already a target. Someone tried my door last night, remember? This is different. You challenged them publicly. Men like Worthington don't forgive that." Eleanor traced patterns in the spilled beer on the table. "Tell me about your badge. Why is it tarnished?" Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. 2 years ago, I was tracking a gang that had robbed a bank in Austin. Followed them to a farmhouse outside San Antonio. I thought it was just the gang, but... He paused, jaw tightening. They had hostages. A family. When we moved in, the gang used them as shields. In the crossfire, a woman was killed. Martha Hendricks. She was 22, had a baby daughter. That wasn't your fault. I gave the order to breach. It was my responsibility. He touched the badge on his chest. I turned this in the next day. The Rangers wouldn't accept it, said I'd done nothing wrong. So I left anyway. Been drifting ever since, ended up here just before the slide. Why did you stay? After the disaster. Someone had to. The sheriff was dead, his deputies either fled or joined Murphy. These people needed protection, even from a broken-down ex-ranger. Eleanor reached across the table, covering his scarred hand with hers. You're not broken. Scarred maybe, but not broken. Broken things don't stand between innocent people and men like Murphy. He turned his hand palm up, interlacing their fingers. The contact sent heat up Eleanor's arm. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know enough. They sat like that for a moment before the saloon door burst open. Brian Turner rushed in, face pale with excitement. They found something at the mine, he gasped. The work crew clearing the main entrance. They broke through to an air pocket. There are survivors. The saloon emptied as everyone rushed toward the mine. Eleanor's heart soared with hope, even as her mind warned her to be cautious. After 2 weeks, the chances of Henry being alive were almost non-existent. At the mine entrance, a crowd had already gathered. Men were frantically clearing debris while others prepared medical supplies. Eleanor pushed through to the front, Caleb beside her. How many? She heard someone ask. Can't tell yet, a miner replied. We can hear voices, at least 3 or 4. They're weak but alive. For 2 hours they worked, carefully removing rocks and timber to widen the opening without causing another collapse. Eleanor helped where she could, carrying water, preparing bandages, her dress now thoroughly ruined with mud and dust. Finally, the opening was large enough for a man to crawl through. A miner named Patterson volunteered to go first. He disappeared into the darkness with a rope tied around his waist. Minutes felt like hours before his voice echoed back. 4 men alive. They're in bad shape, but breathing. The rescue proceeded slowly. The first man brought out was barely conscious, his leg clearly broken. Eleanor didn't recognize him. The second was an older miner with a head wound. The third made Eleanor's heart stop. It was Jim Morrison, one of Henry's friends. He was conscious enough to grab Eleanor's hand when he saw her. Henry, he croaked through cracked lips. Henry saved us. Found the air pocket, led us there when the mountain came down. Where is he? Eleanor asked urgently. Is he the 4th man? Jim's eyes filled with tears. He went back. Said there were others trapped further in. Made us promise to stay put. Said he'd return. But the second collapse, he never came back. Eleanor felt her knees buckle. Caleb caught her, held her steady as the 4th survivor was brought out. Another miner she didn't recognize. Henry wasn't among them. He died a hero, Jim whispered. Saved our lives. The crowd began to disperse, the celebration muted by the confirmation of Henry's death. Eleanor stood frozen at the mine entrance, staring into the darkness that had swallowed the man she'd never met, but had grown to love. Come away, Caleb said gently. There's nothing more here. He went back for others, Eleanor said numbly. He could have saved himself, but he went back. That's who he was, the kind of man who couldn't leave others behind. They walked slowly back to town, Eleanor leaning on Caleb's strength. The sun was setting again, painting the valley in shades of loss. At the boarding house, Mrs. Chen took one look at Eleanor and prepared a hot bath without being asked. Later, clean but hollow, Eleanor sat in her room reading Henry's letters by lamplight. Knowing he'd died saving others somehow made it both better and worse. He'd been everything his letters had suggested, brave, selfless, honorable. The world was poorer for his loss. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Eleanor?" "It's Caleb." She opened the door to find him holding a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "Thought you could use this." They sat by her window, sipping the burning liquid in companionable silence. The whiskey helped numb the sharp edges of grief. "I've been thinking," Caleb said eventually, "Worthington showing up now, right after we found evidence of explosives. It's too convenient. You think he knew about the murders?" "I think he might have ordered them. That false document, Murphy already being in his pocket. This was planned." Eleanor set down her glass, mind clearing with sudden purpose. Then Henry's death wasn't just murder. It was part of something bigger. A conspiracy to steal the mine, eliminate witnesses, and make it look like a natural disaster. "We have to stop them." Caleb studied her face in the lamplight. "This isn't your fight anymore, Eleanor. Henry's gone. You could leave on the next stage, go back to Boston, start over. Could you? If it was your Martha who'd been murdered, could you just walk away?" He flinched at the name but shook his head. "No." "Then don't ask me to." They were sitting close now, close enough that Eleanor could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, could smell the leather and gunpowder scent that clung to him. The air between them crackled with more than shared purpose. "You're a dangerous woman, Eleanor Price," he said softly. "How so?" "You make a man want to be better than he is. Make him believe he could be." Eleanor's breath caught. "Caleb?" He stood abruptly. "Lock your door. Tomorrow we visit the land office, see what other documents might shed light on this conspiracy." After he left, Eleanor did as instructed, but sleep eluded her. Her grief for Henry was real and sharp, but so was this unexpected attraction to Caleb. Was she betraying Henry's memory by feeling drawn to another man so soon? Or would Henry, who'd saved others at the cost of his own life, want her to find happiness where she could? Near midnight, she heard footsteps in the hall again. This time they stopped directly outside her door. The handle didn't turn, but she heard breathing, knew someone stood just inches away. "I know you're there," she called out, surprising herself with her steadiness. "Whatever you want, you won't get it by skulking in hallways like a coward." The breathing stopped. Footsteps retreated quickly down the hall. Eleanor remained awake, chair wedged under the door handle, Henry's compass clutched in one hand and a letter opener in the other. Dawn came slowly, painting the mountains the color of dried blood. Eleanor dressed in her last clean outfit, a simple brown dress that had been intended for everyday wear in her new life as a miner's wife. Now it would serve for hunting her fiancé's killers. She found Caleb already in the dining room, talking urgently with Josiah Wells and Brian Turner. They stopped when she appeared. "What's happened?" "The survivors from the mine," Josiah said. "Jim Morrison wants to talk to you. Says Henry told him something important before he went back into the mine." They found Jim at the medical tent, his broken ribs wrapped tight, face pale but determined. When he saw Eleanor, he struggled to sit up. "Miss Price, I need to tell you what Henry said. Been thinking about it all night, and it didn't make sense until Mr. Mercer here told me about the explosives." Eleanor sat beside his cot. "What did he say?" "When the first blast hit, we were deep in the new shaft. Henry grabbed me and 3 others, led us to a natural cave formation he'd found weeks earlier. As we ran, he kept saying, 'They did it. They actually did it.' When I asked what he meant, he said Harland had threatened to bury the mine if Henry didn't sell." "Edward Harland? The owner of the Compass Rose?" Jim nodded. "But there's more. Henry said he'd hidden proof. Said if anything happened to him, to tell his fiancée to look where dreams meet destiny. I thought he was delirious, but he made me repeat it 3 times. Eleanor's heart raced. Dreams meet destiny. What could that mean? I don't know, ma'am. But Henry was clear-headed when he said it, even with the mountain coming down around us. They left Jim to rest and gathered outside the medical tent. The morning was already hot, promising another scorching day. Dreams meet destiny, Eleanor repeated. It has to mean something specific, something only I would understand from his letters. Think, Caleb urged. Did he write about dreams? About destiny? Eleanor closed her eyes, sorting through months of correspondence in her mind. Then it hit her. The church. He wrote that the church was where our dreams would meet our destiny, where we'd be married, start our new life. They practically ran to the partially buried church. The bell tower still protruded from the dried mud, but the entrance was completely blocked. However, Caleb noticed something. The back vestry. Look, it's partially clear. They spent an hour digging with their hands and some borrowed shovels before they could squeeze through into the vestry. The small room was coated in dried mud, but structurally intact. Eleanor searched frantically while Caleb held the lantern. Here, she said, finding a loose floorboard beneath where the altar would have stood. Underneath was an oilskin packet. With shaking hands, she opened it. Inside were documents, photographs, and what appeared to be correspondence. The first letter was in Henry's handwriting. If you're reading this, then my fears have come true. Edward Harland, in conspiracy with Charles Worthington and others, plans to steal the Silver Hope through murder and deception. The evidence herein proves their guilt. Trust Caleb Mercer. He's the only honest lawman left in the territory. Eleanor looked up at Caleb, eyes wide. He knew about you. Trusted you before you even met. They examined the other documents. There were telegrams between Harland and Worthington discussing removing obstacles and clearing the path. There was a receipt for 500 pounds of dynamite, far more than any legitimate mining operation would need. Most damning was a contract between Worthington's Philadelphia consortium and several territorial officials promising bribes for looking the other way during the acquisition of the Silver Hope. This is it, Caleb breathed. This is enough to hang them all. We need to get this to the marshal. The sound of guns cocking cut her off. They turned to find Murphy and 3 men pointing weapons at them. I'll take those documents, Murphy said with a cold smile. Mr. Worthington figured you might find something. He's smart that way. You've been following us? Eleanor realized. Since last night. Watched you from the shadows, waited for you to lead us to whatever Blackwell hid. Murphy held out his hand. The papers. Now, Caleb stepped partially in front of Eleanor. You kill us here, in a church, and even bought lawmen won't be able to ignore it. Who says we're killing you here? Murphy's grin widened. Tragic accident, really. Former ranger and his lady friend got trapped in an unstable building during their treasure hunting. Another collapse. This town's seen so much death, 2 more bodies won't raise eyebrows. Eleanor clutched the documents tighter. These papers were Henry's legacy, proof of his murder. She couldn't let them be destroyed. I'd rather die than give these to you, she said. That can be arranged, Murphy replied, then paused. Or maybe we keep you alive for a while. I'm sure Mr. Worthington could find uses for a pretty thing like you. Caleb's hand moved toward his gun, but Murphy's men were ready. Don't be stupid, Mercer. You're fast, but not fast enough to beat 4 guns. The standoff stretched taut. Eleanor's mind raced, searching for options. Then she heard something, voices outside, getting closer. Murphy heard it too. Boss, one of his men said nervously. Someone's coming. It was Josiah Wells with a group of miners, likely coming to help with the digging. Murphy cursed. We're leaving. Bring the papers and the woman. No, Caleb said firmly. Murphy's gun swung toward him. Then you die now. Eleanor made a decision. She threw the packet of documents into the air, papers scattering everywhere. In the confusion, Caleb drew and fired, hitting one of Murphy's men. Murphy cursed and grabbed Eleanor, using her as a shield while his remaining men scrambled for the documents. Leave them, Murphy snarled. We've got what we need. He dragged Eleanor toward a hole in the vestry wall, his gun pressed to her ribs. Caleb started forward, but Murphy pressed the barrel harder into Eleanor's side. Follow us and she dies. They disappeared through the hole just as Josiah and the miners burst in. Caleb quickly explained while gathering the scattered documents. They've got Eleanor, probably taking her to Worthington. Then we get her back, Josiah said simply. Henry saved 4 of our boys. We won't let his woman die. Within minutes, word had spread through the survivors. Men who'd lost everything in the slide began checking weapons, saddling horses. The murdered town had found its backbone. Caleb organized quickly. Some men would create a distraction at the Imperial Hotel where Worthington was staying. Others would watch the roads out of town. He would go directly for Eleanor. Mercer. Brian Turner appeared with an old but serviceable Winchester. Henry would want you to have this. It was his father's rifle. Caleb took the weapon, checked its action. We'll get her back. I know you will. We all know what you did in Texas, regardless of how it ended. You're still the best lawman this territory has seen. As the sun climbed toward noon, turning the ruins of Silvervale into a furnace, Caleb prepared for what might be his last gunfight. He thought about Eleanor's fierce courage, her determination to see justice done. She'd come west expecting to find love, and instead found death and conspiracy. But she hadn't broken. Instead, she'd become something stronger, someone Henry Blackwell would have been proud to call his wife. The sound of breaking glass echoed from the hotel. The distraction had begun. Caleb moved through the shadows between buildings, every sense alert. He had to find Eleanor before Worthington decided she was more trouble than she was worth. A woman's scream cut through the air, but it wasn't fear in that sound. It was fury. Eleanor was fighting back. Caleb ran toward the sound, knowing he was likely heading into a trap but unable to stop himself. Eleanor Price had come to Silvervale as a mail-order bride, but she'd become so much more. She'd become the heart of the town's resistance, the voice of its dead, and somehow, despite his best efforts to keep his distance, she'd become essential to him as well. The afternoon sun reached its zenith as Caleb approached the abandoned assay office, where the sounds of struggle had originated. Through a broken window, he could see Eleanor fighting against Murphy's grip while Worthington stood nearby, papers spread on a dusty table. "Sign it," Worthington was saying. "Sign the statement that Henry sold me the mine before his death, and you can leave alive." "I'll die first," Eleanor spat, then proved her determination by driving her boot heel into Murphy's instep. Caleb smiled grimly. Whatever happened next, Eleanor Price was nobody's victim. She was a force of nature, and heaven help anyone who stood in her path. The Winchester's stock felt solid against Caleb's shoulder as he took aim through the broken window. Inside the assay office, Murphy cursed and yanked Eleanor's arm behind her back, making her cry out. The sound sent rage coursing through Caleb's veins, but he forced himself to remain steady. One shot. He'd have one clear shot before everything went to hell. "You're trying my patience, Miss Price," Worthington said, his cultured voice sharp with frustration. "Your signature makes this legitimate. Without it, we'll have to resort to more unpleasant methods." "You mean murder?" Eleanor's voice was steady despite the pain Murphy was inflicting. "Like you murdered Henry and 72 other souls." Worthington's facade cracked slightly. "That was Harlan's doing. Too messy, too dramatic. I prefer cleaner solutions." "Where is Harlan?" Eleanor demanded. "Dead," Worthington said simply. "He became a liability after the slide. Too nervous, too guilty. Murphy handled it yesterday morning." Murphy grinned at the memory. "Found him trying to flee to Mexico. Convinced him to take a different route. Straight to hell." Caleb processed this information while adjusting his aim. One conspirator already dead by their own hands. These men would turn on each other like rabid dogs if given the chance. He needed to create that chance. Eleanor suddenly went limp in Murphy's grip, her full weight dropping. As Murphy instinctively adjusted his hold, she drove her elbow into his solar plexus. The momentary separation was all Caleb needed. The Winchester roared and Murphy's gun went flying from his hand along with 2 of his fingers. Murphy's scream filled the air as Caleb burst through the door. Worthington dove for cover behind the heavy oak desk while Murphy clutched his maimed hand, blood spurting between his remaining fingers. "Eleanor, get down!" Caleb shouted, but she was already moving, grabbing the papers from the desk and diving behind an overturned cabinet. 2 more of Murphy's men rushed in from the back room. Caleb fired the Winchester again, catching one in the shoulder, spinning him around. The other got off a shot that splintered wood inches from Caleb's head. He dropped the rifle and drew his Colt, the familiar weight settling into his palm like an old friend. The confined space erupted in gunfire. Caleb moved with practiced efficiency, each shot deliberate, each movement calculated. This was what he'd been trained for, what he'd spent years perfecting before Martha Hendrick's death had shattered his confidence. But now, with Eleanor's life at stake, there was no room for doubt or hesitation. The second gunman went down with a bullet in his thigh. Murphy, despite his injured hand, had pulled a backup pistol with his left hand and was firing wildly. One shot grazed Caleb's ribs, sending fire along his side, but he didn't slow. "Give it up, Murphy," Caleb called out, pressing his hand against the bleeding wound. "Your men are down. Worthington's hiding like the coward he is. It's over." "Nothing's over," Murphy snarled. "You think you've won?" "There are more coming. Worthington's got connections you can't imagine." Through the window, Caleb could see townspeople gathering outside, armed with whatever they could find: pickaxes, shovels, ancient rifles, and shotguns. Josiah Wells stood at their front, the old miner's face set with determination. "Your reinforcements aren't coming," Caleb said. "The whole town's turned against you." "They know what you did." Worthington suddenly emerged from behind the desk, a derringer in his hand pointed at Eleanor. "Everyone stop, or the woman dies." Eleanor looked at the small gun with contempt. "A two-shot pocket pistol? That's your grand play?" "2 shots are more than enough at this range," Worthington said coldly. "Now, Mr. Mercer, drop your weapon." Caleb hesitated, calculating distances and angles. The derringer was small but deadly at close range. Before he could decide, Eleanor acted. She threw the handful of papers she'd grabbed into the air, creating a cloud of distraction. In the same motion, she rolled aside as Worthington fired, the bullet sparking off the floor where she'd been. Caleb's shot took Worthington in the shoulder before he could fire his second round. The man from Philadelphia crumpled, his city suit now stained with blood and dust. Murphy made one last desperate lunge for Eleanor, but she grabbed a brass paperweight from the floor and swung it with all her might. The sound of it connecting with Murphy's temple was deeply satisfying. Murphy collapsed, unconscious or dead. Eleanor didn't care which. She stood there, breathing hard, dress torn and hair wild, looking like an avenging angel who'd clawed her way out of hell. "Are you hurt?" Caleb asked, moving quickly to her side. "No. You're bleeding, though. Just a graze." He pulled her against him, unable to stop himself from holding her for just a moment. She was alive, she was safe, and somehow that mattered more than anything else in the world. The door burst open as townspeople flooded in. Someone had brought rope, and they quickly secured the wounded conspirators. Doc Harrison arrived, medical bag in hand, and immediately went to work on the injured, starting with Caleb despite his protests. "Hold still," the doctor ordered. "That's more than a graze. You're lucky it didn't hit anything vital." While the doctor worked, Eleanor gathered the scattered documents. Some were the ones from the church, but others were new. Worthington's own papers that proved the conspiracy went even deeper than they'd thought. "Look at this," she said, showing Caleb a telegram. "It's from a senator in Washington. He was part of it too, promised to block any federal investigation in exchange for a percentage of the profits." Josiah Wells spat tobacco juice on Worthington's expensive shoes. "How deep does this snake pit go?" "Deep enough," Caleb said grimly. "We need to get these documents to the federal marshal immediately, and we need to do it before anyone else involved learns what's happened here." Brian Turner stepped forward. "I'll ride to Prescott myself. Take my best horse and go straight through." "Take 2 men with you," Caleb advised. "Armed men. There might be others on the road." As Turner prepared to leave, Eleanor noticed something in one of Worthington's ledgers. Her face paled as she read. "Caleb, look at this. It's a list of mines targeted for acquisition. The Silver Hope was just the first. They plan to do this across the entire territory. The implications were staggering. How many towns would have been destroyed? How many innocent people murdered for greed?" Worthington, despite his wounded shoulder, managed a bitter laugh. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into. The men I work for don't accept failure. They'll send others." "Let them come," Caleb said. "We'll be ready." The afternoon wore on as they sorted through evidence and tended to wounds. Eleanor worked alongside Mrs. Chen to treat the injured, her gentle hands and calm demeanor helping to soothe those in pain. Caleb watched her, amazed at her transformation from the proper Boston governess who'd stepped off the stagecoach just days ago. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, a shout went up from the street. A rider was approaching fast from the east. Caleb grabbed his rifle, expecting trouble, but relaxed when he recognized the rider as Tom Davis, who'd been stationed as a lookout. "Marshal's coming," Davis announced. "Federal Marshal John Sterling with a dozen deputies. They'll be here within the hour." Relief washed through the crowd. Federal authority meant real justice, not the frontier variety that often ended with a rope and a tree. Eleanor found Caleb standing apart from the celebration, looking out at the ruins of Silvervale. She touched his arm gently. "You're thinking about her." "Martha." He nodded slowly. "She'd be about your age now if she'd lived. Had the same kind of courage, the same unwillingness to back down from what was right." "You saved me," Eleanor said softly. "You saved this whole town. That has to count for something." "Maybe." He turned to face her fully. "What will you do now? The town's half destroyed, Henry's gone, and you've got no reason to stay." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, considering. "The town needs rebuilding. The survivors need someone to help them fight for compensation from Worthington's consortium. And—" she hesitated, then met his eyes directly. "I think I might have found a reason to stay after all." The air between them crackled with unspoken possibilities. Caleb reached up to touch her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone where a bruise was forming from the fight. "Eleanor, you came here to marry Henry Blackwell. He was a good man, better than me in every way. You deserve—" She stopped him by pressing her fingers to his lips. "Henry's gone, and I'll mourn him properly. But he would understand that life continues for the living. In his last letter, he wrote something I didn't understand until now. He said if anything happened to him, I should find happiness wherever I could, that the territory was full of good men who'd appreciate a strong woman." "He knew," Caleb said wonderingly. "Somehow, he knew." Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. The federal marshals had arrived, led by a stern-faced man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. Marshal Sterling surveyed the scene, the wounded conspirators, the armed townspeople, the evidence laid out on tables. "Caleb Mercer," he said, dismounting. "Got your telegraph? Looks like you've been busy." "Marshal Sterling," Caleb shook the man's hand. "It's worse than I thought. This goes all the way to Washington." Sterling's expression darkened as he examined the documents Eleanor presented. Jesus Christ. A senator, 2 territorial judges, and at least 3 mining commissioners. This is going to shake the whole territory. "Will they face justice?" Eleanor asked. Sterling looked at her, taking in her torn dress and determined expression. "You're Miss Price? The one who found the evidence?" "I had help. Ma'am, with what you've uncovered here, I can promise you they'll all face trial. Federal trial. Some of them will hang, others will spend the rest of their lives in prison." He turned to his deputies. "Secure the prisoners. We're taking them to Prescott tonight." As the marshals worked, Sterling pulled Caleb aside. "I heard about Texas. What happened with the Hendricks woman?" Caleb stiffened, but Sterling continued. "I also heard about everything you did before that. 23 successful operations, more commendations than any ranger in the territory. One tragedy doesn't erase all that good. Tell that to Martha Hendricks." "I can't, but I can tell you that the Rangers want you back. Hell, after this, they'll probably give you a promotion." Caleb looked over at Eleanor, who was helping to bandage one of the injured miners. "I think my rangering days are done, Marshal. Found something else worth doing." Sterling followed his gaze and smiled slightly. "I see. Well, if you change your mind, the offer stands." As night fell, the conspirators were loaded into a prison wagon. Worthington, pale from blood loss but still arrogant, called out to Eleanor as he passed. "You think you've won, but you've gained nothing. The mine is still buried, the town is still destroyed, and your precious Henry is still dead." Eleanor stepped forward, her chin raised. "Henry died saving others. You'll die at the end of a rope, remembered only as a murderer and a coward. I'd say I've won everything that matters. Murphy, conscious now but groggy, spat at her feet. Should have killed you when I had the chance. You never had a chance, Caleb said coldly. Men like you always think violence is strength, but you're wrong. She's stronger than you'll ever be. The prison wagon rolled away, taking the conspirators toward justice. The townspeople began to disperse, exhausted from the day's events. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, clearing the mine, rebuilding homes, fighting legal battles for compensation. But tonight, they had victory. Eleanor stood in the street, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. Caleb joined her, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. I need to bury him properly, she said quietly. Henry deserves a real funeral, with words said over him. We'll organize it tomorrow. The whole town will come. He saved 4 men. Their families will want to pay their respects. And after that? After that, we rebuild. The Silver Hope is still down there, still full of silver. The town can rise again, stronger than before. We? Eleanor looked up at him. You're staying? Caleb took her hand, interlacing their fingers as he had in the saloon that first night. If you'll have me. I know I'm not what you came here for. No, Eleanor agreed. You're what I found. Henry brought me here, but maybe this was always meant to happen. Maybe fate has its own plans. They stood together in the darkness, 2 damaged souls who'd found each other in the ruins of tragedy. Around them, the destroyed town slept fitfully, but there was hope now. The truth had been revealed, justice was being served, and from the ashes of Silvervale, something new could grow. The next morning brought unexpected revelations. As the townspeople gathered to plan Henry's funeral, a stranger arrived on the morning stage. He was young, barely 20, with Henry's same strong jaw and kind eyes. I'm looking for Eleanor Price, he announced. I'm William Blackwell, Henry's brother. Eleanor's heart clenched. She'd known Henry had a younger brother in Colorado, but hadn't expected him to come. William's eyes were red-rimmed with grief, but he held himself with dignity. I received word about Henry. I came as soon as I could. He looked at Eleanor. You're her, aren't you? The woman he was going to marry? Yes. William reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Henry sent this to me 2 weeks before the slide. He said if anything happened to him, I was to give it to you personally. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened the letter. Henry's familiar handwriting blurred through her tears. My dearest Eleanor, she read aloud, if you're reading this, then my fears have come true. The dangers I've faced here have finally caught up with me, but please don't mourn too long. You came west for a new life, and I want you to have it, even if I can't be part of it. The territory needs strong women like you. Silvervale needs someone who believes in justice and truth. Mr. Mercer, whom I've asked to protect you if needed, is the best man I know in Arizona. Trust him. More than that, if your heart leads you to him, follow it without guilt. My greatest wish was for your happiness. If I cannot provide it, I pray someone worthy will. All my love. Henry. Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest, tears flowing freely. Even in death, Henry was looking out for her, giving her permission to live and love again. William cleared his throat. There's also this. He handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold ring with a small diamond, modest but beautiful. He bought it the day before the slide, had it sent to me for safekeeping until the wedding. Eleanor slipped the ring onto her right hand, a remembrance of the man who'd brought her to Arizona and, in dying, had given her a new life. The funeral was held that afternoon in the ruins of the church. They couldn't recover Henry's body, but they placed a wooden cross where the altar had stood. The 4 miners Henry had saved served as pallbearers for the symbolic casket. Jim Morrison, still weak from his ordeal, spoke about Henry's courage in those final moments. He could have stayed safe in that air pocket with us, Jim said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. But he heard voices further in the mine, men trapped behind a cave-in. He said he couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. Last thing he told us was to tell his fiancée that he loved her, and was sorry he couldn't keep his promise to make her happy. But looking at what Miss Price has done these past days, fighting for justice for all of us, I think Henry would be proud. Eleanor spoke next, her voice strong despite her tears. I never met Henry Blackwell in person, but through his letters I knew his heart. He was kind, brave, and honest. He died as he lived, thinking of others before himself. We honor him best not with tears, but with action. By rebuilding this town, by ensuring justice for all who died, and by living the kinds of lives that would make him proud. After the service, the townspeople began organizing reconstruction efforts. The mining company, faced with the evidence of conspiracy and murder, agreed to fund the rebuilding and compensate the victims' families. It would take months, maybe years, but Silvervale would rise again. That evening, Eleanor stood at Henry's grave marker, the sunset painting the mountains gold. Caleb approached quietly, standing beside her in respectful silence. "He gave us his blessing," Eleanor said softly. "In the letter. He knew somehow. He was a smart man. Saw things others missed." Eleanor turned to face Caleb. "I need time to grieve properly. Henry deserves that. But after, would you wait?" Caleb took her hand, kissing it gently. "I've been waiting my whole life for you, Eleanor. A few more months won't hurt." As the stars emerged in the desert sky, they walked back toward town together. The ruins of Silvervale stretched before them, but no longer did they see only destruction. They saw possibility, hope, and a future worth building. 3 months later, the transformation of Silvervale had begun in earnest. The mine had been cleared and was producing silver again, with Jim Morrison promoted to foreman in Henry's honor. New buildings were rising from the ruins, stronger and better planned than before. The school had been rebuilt first, at Eleanor's insistence, with a memorial plaque listing all who died in the slide. Eleanor had taken over the interim management of the town's reconstruction committee, her education and organizational skills proving invaluable. She'd also been corresponding with lawyers in San Francisco, ensuring the conspirators faced federal trial and that compensation reached the victims' families. The trial had been a sensation, with newspapers from across the country covering it. Worthington and 2 others had been sentenced to hang. Murphy got life in prison, as did several corrupt officials. The senator from Washington had fled to Europe, but there were warrants for his arrest should he ever return. On a clear autumn morning, Eleanor stood in her new office. She'd been officially hired by the mining company as their liaison with the town. Through the window, she could see the mountains that had brought so much death, but also held the promise of life. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Caleb entered, still wearing his badge, but now it gleamed like new. The town had officially appointed him sheriff, and the rangers had given him an honorary commission. "The stage just brought this," he said, handing her a telegram. Eleanor read it, her eyes widening. "It's from the territorial governor. He's coming to Silvervale next month for the official memorial dedication. He wants to present me with a commendation for my role in uncovering the conspiracy. You deserve it. You saved this town. We saved it together." Caleb moved closer, his hand coming to rest on her waist. The 3 months of official mourning had passed, and while Eleanor would always carry affection for Henry in her heart, she'd allowed herself to fall completely in love with the scarred former ranger who'd become her protector, partner, and best friend. "Eleanor, I have something to ask you." She smiled, knowing what was coming. They'd been dancing around this moment for weeks. "I'm not a rich man," Caleb began. "I don't have a fine house or fancy prospects. All I have is this badge, this gun, and a promise to stand beside you through whatever comes. But if you'll have me..." Eleanor silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her answer into that single gesture. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes to everything. To you, to this town, to the life we'll build together." Caleb pulled out a simple gold band. Not as fine as Henry's ring, but Eleanor wouldn't have wanted it any other way. This was their story, their choice, their future. "When?" he asked. "The church is nearly rebuilt. How about next month, when the governor comes? Let the whole territory see that Silvervale didn't just survive, it thrived." They were married on a crisp November day, in the rebuilt church where Eleanor should have married Henry. William Blackwell gave her away, saying his brother would have wanted it. The whole town attended, even Jim Morrison and the other miners Henry had saved. As Eleanor and Caleb exchanged vows, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She'd come to Arizona as a mail-order bride, expecting one life and finding another entirely. She'd faced death, conspiracy, and loss, but had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. Outside the church, the town celebrated. Silvervale had been reborn from mud and tragedy, stronger for having survived. The silver mine was producing more than ever. New families were arriving weekly, and hope had replaced despair. That evening, as Eleanor and Caleb danced at their wedding reception, she noticed something. Pinned to Caleb's vest beside his sheriff's badge was Henry's compass, the one she'd given him that morning as a wedding gift. "So you never lose your way," she'd told him. "With you beside me," he'd replied, "how could I?" The music played on, couples danced, children laughed, and life continued its eternal rhythm. In the ruins of tragedy, love had bloomed. In the shadow of death, life had triumphed. And in a town that had lost everything, two souls had found each other and discovered that sometimes destiny has plans far different from our own. Eleanor had come west to marry a good man, and in a way, she had. Henry's goodness had brought her to Silvervale. His courage had inspired her to fight for justice, and his blessing had allowed her to love again without guilt. She would honor his memory by living fully, loving deeply, and ensuring that Silvervale's resurrection stood as testament to all who had died in the slide. As the stars emerged over the Arizona desert, Eleanor and Caleb stood together, looking out at their town, scarred but surviving, wounded but healing, forever changed but ultimately triumphant. The winter that followed their wedding brought unexpected challenges to Silvervale. December's bitter winds howled through the valley, and with them came a stranger who would shake the foundations of everything Eleanor and Caleb had built. The man stepped off the afternoon stage dressed in an expensive black coat, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. But it was the way he moved, calculated, dangerous, that made Caleb's hand drift instinctively to his gun. "Trouble," Caleb murmured to Eleanor as they watched from their office window. They'd been reviewing plans for the new courthouse when the stage arrived. "You know him?" "No, but I know the type. See how he's scanning the buildings, memorizing exits? That's a gunfighter, or I'm not wearing a badge." The stranger made his way to the Imperial Hotel, which had been rebuilt grander than before with compensation money from Worthington's consortium. Eleanor tried to dismiss her unease, but throughout the day she noticed the man appearing at odd moments, outside the bank when she made a deposit, across from the school when she checked on the children's Christmas preparations, near the mine entrance when she delivered payroll documents. That evening, as Eleanor and Caleb sat by their fireplace in the small house they'd built on the edge of town, a knock came at the door. Caleb answered with his gun drawn but concealed behind the doorframe. The stranger stood there, hat in hand, revealing a face marked by years of hard living and eyes the color of old brass. "Sheriff Mercer, Mrs. Mercer," he said with a slight southern drawl. "My name is Samuel Cross. I believe we need to talk about Charles Worthington." Eleanor's blood chilled. Worthington had been hanged 2 months ago, his conspiracy exposed and justice served. "What about him?" "May I come in?" "What I have to say shouldn't be discussed on doorsteps." Caleb stepped aside, but kept his weapon ready. Cross entered, his movements respectful but alert, like a wolf accepting temporary domestication. He took the chair Caleb indicated, one that put his back to a wall and gave him a view of both doors. "Worthington had a brother," Cross began without preamble. "Thomas. Older, meaner, and considerably more dangerous. He's been in South America these past 5 years, running emerald mines with methods that would make what happened here look civilized." "And?" Caleb prompted, though he could already guess. "He's returned. Landed in San Francisco 2 weeks ago. Word is he's coming here to settle what he considers a blood debt." Cross pulled out a wanted poster from his coat. The man in the sketch bore enough resemblance to Charles Worthington to be recognizable as kin, but where Charles had possessed a certain soft city weakness, this face was all hard angles and predator eyes. "Why warn us?" Eleanor asked. "What's your interest in this?" Cross was quiet for a moment, then rolled up his left sleeve to reveal an old brand mark, the letter T burned into his forearm. "Thomas Worthington owned the mine in Colombia where I was employed. Not by choice. I escaped 3 years ago, but not before seeing him murder 17 miners for trying to organize for better conditions. He buried them alive in a shaft, sealed it, and made the rest of us listen to them die over 3 days. Eleanor's hand found Caleb's, squeezing tight. The horror of it was too familiar, too close to what had happened in Silvervale. "So you're here for revenge," Caleb said. "Justice," Cross corrected. "There's paper on him in 4 countries, but he's got money and connections. He bribes his way out of trouble or leaves bodies behind when he can't." He looked directly at Eleanor. "He blames you specifically, ma'am. You're the one who found the evidence, testified at the trial. In his mind, you killed his brother." "His brother killed himself with his greed and murder," Eleanor said firmly, though fear crept along her spine. "Men like Thomas don't see it that way. He's bringing professional guns with him, at least 4, maybe more. They'll arrive separately, drift into town over the next week to avoid suspicion. Then they'll move." Caleb stood, pacing to the window. "How do you know all this?" "I've been tracking him since I heard he left Colombia. I have friends who keep me informed, people who suffered under his rule." Cross stood as well. "I'm not asking to be deputized or welcomed. I'm just telling you what's coming. What you do with the information is your choice." After Cross left, Eleanor and Caleb sat in tense silence. They'd fought so hard to rebuild Silvervale, to create something good from the ashes of tragedy. Now that peace was threatened again. "We could leave," Eleanor said quietly. "Start over somewhere else." Caleb looked at her in surprise. "You want to run?" "I want to live. We both know what men like this are capable of. We've seen it. And if we run, what happens to the town? To Jim Morrison and Josiah Wells and Mrs. Chen? Do we leave them to face Worthington's vengeance alone?" Eleanor closed her eyes, knowing he was right. They couldn't abandon the people who'd become their family, their community. "Then we fight." "Then we fight," Caleb agreed, pulling her close. "But we fight smart." The next morning, Caleb quietly began preparations. He met with the town council, explaining the threat without causing panic. Jim Morrison and the miners volunteered to stand guard in shifts. Mrs. Chen organized the women to watch for strangers. Even the children were given tasks, running messages, watching from high windows where they wouldn't be suspected as lookouts. 3 days passed in tense normality. Eleanor continued her work at the mining office, though Caleb insisted she carry the small derringer Henry had meant to give her as a wedding present. She'd never thought she'd need it, but now its weight in her pocket provided cold comfort. On the 4th day, the first stranger arrived. He called himself Wade Jackson, claiming to be a cattle buyer from Texas. But his hands were too soft for ranch work, and his eyes lingered too long on the sheriff's office. Caleb assigned Josiah to shadow him discreetly. The second came the next day. A woman, which surprised everyone. She took a room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house under the name Catherine Moore, said she was a widow heading to California but needed rest from her travels. She was beautiful in a hard way, with dark hair and green eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Chen reported that she asked many questions about the town's layout, especially about the sheriff's home. "A woman gunfighter?" Eleanor asked when Caleb told her. "I've seen it before. Sometimes they're deadlier than the men because no one expects it." The 3rd and 4th arrived together, posing as mining equipment salesmen. They spent their time in the saloon, buying drinks for locals and listening to gossip about the mudslide and its aftermath. Thomas Worthington himself arrived on a cold Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after Cross's warning. He didn't try to hide his identity or his intent. He stepped off the stage wearing a black suit that probably cost more than most townspeople saw in a year, with silver-handled Colts on both hips. His resemblance to his dead brother was unmistakable, but where Charles had been soft, Thomas was carved from granite and hate. He walked directly to the sheriff's office, his footsteps echoing on the wooden sidewalk. Caleb was waiting, standing behind his desk with calculated casualness that didn't fool anyone who knew him. "Sheriff Mercer," Thomas said, removing his hat with mocking courtesy, "I'm Thomas Worthington. I believe you knew my brother. I knew he was a murderer and a thief. That's all I needed to know." Thomas's smile was winter cold. "He was family. In my world, that means something. In my world, murder means something too. Your brother killed 73 people. He got what he deserved." Perhaps. But the woman who destroyed him, who testified against him with such passion, she didn't just seek justice, did she? She wanted vengeance for her dead lover. I can respect that. In fact, I understand it perfectly. Caleb's hand rested on his gun. Whatever you're planning, reconsider. This town has seen enough death. Oh, I'm not planning anything illegal, Sheriff. I'm a businessman, here to explore investment opportunities. The Silver Hope mine, for instance. I understand it's producing well. Perhaps the owners would consider selling to avoid any unfortunate accidents. That sounds like a threat. Does it? How careless of me. Thomas stood, replacing his hat. I'll be staying at the Imperial. Do give your wife my regards. Tell her I look forward to making her acquaintance. After he left, Caleb immediately went to find Eleanor. She was at the school, helping with Christmas decorations. The sight of her surrounded by laughing children, tinsel in her hair, and paint on her dress made his heart clench. This was what they were fighting for, not just their own lives, but this peace, this normalcy, these moments of joy that towns like Silvervale deserved. We need to talk, he said quietly. Eleanor saw his expression and immediately made excuses to the teacher. They walked to the church, one of the few places they could speak privately. He's here, Caleb said. Made his intentions clear without saying anything actionable. He wants you to know he's coming for you. Then we end this before it starts. We have Cross's information about the murders in Columbia. We could telegraph he'd be gone before any federal marshals arrived, and his hired guns would stay to finish the job. Caleb took her hands. Eleanor, I want you to leave town for a while. Visit William in Colorado, or... No! Her voice was firm as bedrock. We've had this discussion. I'm not running, and I'm not leaving you to face this alone. This is different from Murphy and Charles. These are professional killers. And we have the truth on our side. We have the town on our side. She touched his face gently. We have each other. That has to count for something. That night, Samuel Cross appeared at their back door like a shadow-given form. They're meeting tonight, he said without preamble. Midnight, at the old assay office where you caught Charles. They think it's poetic justice to plan your deaths in the same place. How do you know? Caleb asked. I convinced one of the salesmen that I was interested in employment. Thomas wants a public spectacle. He plans to call you out at noon tomorrow, Sheriff. While everyone's watching that show, the woman, Catherine, will take care of Mrs. Mercer. Make it look like she was caught in crossfire. Eleanor felt ice in her veins. He's using me as bait. More than that, Cross said. He knows Mercer will be distracted if you're in danger. Divided attention in a gunfight means death. Then we change the game, Caleb said, his mind already working through possibilities. Cross, how far are you willing to go for your justice? The scarred man smiled grimly. All the way to hell if necessary. They spent the next hours planning. It had to be perfect. One mistake would mean death for all of them. Eleanor wrote out her will, just in case, leaving the evidence about Thomas's Colombian murders with Judge Patterson, who'd recently arrived to establish proper law in Silvervale. Caleb cleaned his weapons with methodical precision. Cross disappeared into the night to make his own preparations. At dawn, Eleanor stood in her kitchen making coffee with hands that barely trembled. Through the window, she could see men positioning themselves around town, some loyal to them, others clearly Worthington's hired guns. The tension was thick enough to choke on. A knock at the door made her jump. It was Mrs. Chen, accompanied by several women from town. We're not leaving you alone today, the older woman said firmly. Whatever happens, you won't face it by yourself. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. This isn't your fight. Isn't it? Asked Mary Morrison, Jim's wife. Your man saved my husband in that mine. You fought for justice for all our dead. This is everyone's fight. By 11 o'clock, word had spread through town about the noon showdown. People shuttered windows and cleared the streets. But Eleanor noticed they didn't hide. They watched from doorways and rooftops, rifles and shotguns ready. Silvervale had been murdered once. It wouldn't happen again without a fight. At 1:45, Eleanor took her position in the mining office, surrounded by the women of the town. Catherine Moore had been spotted moving toward their position, just as Cross had predicted. But the beautiful killer didn't know she was walking into a trap of their own devising. From the window, Eleanor could see Caleb standing in the middle of the main street. His badge caught the sun like a star, and his hand rested easy on his Colt. Thomas Worthington emerged from the hotel exactly at noon, his hired guns spreading out to what they thought were advantageous positions. They didn't notice the miners already in place on the roofs or the way every window held a rifle barrel. "Sheriff Mercer," Thomas called out, his voice carrying clearly. "I challenge you to settle this like men. No badges, no law, just justice for my brother." "Your brother got justice," Caleb replied. "A trial, a verdict, and a rope. That's more than he gave his victims. Nevertheless, I demand satisfaction." "Then come and take it." Eleanor watched Catherine Moore slip into the building's back entrance, moving with deadly grace toward the stairs. But she'd barely made it 3 steps before Mrs. Chen stepped out behind her with an ancient but functional scattergun. "Drop the weapons," the boarding house owner said calmly. Catherine spun, her hand flying to the pistol at her hip, but froze when she saw not just Mrs. Chen, but 5 other women, all armed, all with the steady eyes of people who'd survived catastrophe and wouldn't be victims again. "You're making a mistake," Catherine said, her cultured voice at odds with the situation. "No," Eleanor said, stepping into view with Henry's derringer steady in her hand. "You made the mistake when you came to our town." Outside, the gunfight erupted with thunder. Caleb drew faster than thought, his first shot catching Thomas in the shoulder, spinning him around. The hired guns opened fire, but immediately found themselves under assault from unexpected directions. Miners fired from rooftops, shopkeepers from doorways. Josiah Wells put a load of buckshot into Wade Jackson's legs, dropping him screaming to the dust. One of the equipment salesmen tried to flank Caleb, but never saw Samuel Cross emerge from the shadows of the saloon. The gunfighter's revenge was swift and final, a single shot that dropped the man before he could fire. Thomas, wounded but not finished, managed to get behind a water trough. "You think you've won?" he shouted. "I have more men coming. An army if necessary." "No, you don't," Cross called out, stepping into the open. "I telegraphed every lawman between here and San Francisco about your location and intentions. There's nowhere to run, Thomas. It ends here." Thomas's face contorted with rage when he recognized Cross. You're supposed to be dead." "Disappointed? You should have made sure of it in Columbia." Thomas rose from cover, both guns blazing. Cross and Caleb fired simultaneously, their shots converging on the man who'd brought death to so many. Thomas Worthington crumpled to the dusty street, his blood mixing with the earth of the town his brother had tried to destroy. The remaining hired guns, seeing their employer dead and facing the armed fury of an entire town, threw down their weapons. Catherine Moore, realizing she was outmaneuvered and outgunned by a group of determined townswomen, did the same with a bitter smile. "I underestimated you," she told Eleanor. "I won't make that mistake again." "You won't get the chance," Eleanor replied. "Federal marshals are already on their way. You'll hang beside any of these men who survive." The aftermath was swift. Judge Patterson, who'd watched the entire confrontation from his office, ruled it justified self-defense. The surviving hired guns were arrested and held for federal authorities. Catherine Moore, it turned out, had warrants in 3 states for murder and attempted murder. She'd be facing trial in California first. Samuel Cross stood over Thomas Worthington's body, his quest for justice finally complete. "It's done," he said quietly. 17 miners can rest easier." "What will you do now?" Caleb asked. Cross looked at the badge on Caleb's chest, then at the town around them. "Maybe find a place that needs protecting. A place that understands justice isn't always clean or pretty, but necessary." "Silvervale could use another deputy," Caleb offered. "Man with your skills would be welcome." Cross considered this, then nodded slowly. "I'll think on it." That evening, as the town celebrated their second victory over those who would destroy them, Eleanor stood with Caleb on the hill overlooking Silvervale. The Christmas decorations twinkled in windows, and the sound of singing drifted from the saloon, not drunken carousing, but genuine celebration of life and community. "We did it," Eleanor said, leaning into her husband's embrace. "We really did it." "You did it," Caleb corrected. "You and those women. turned the tables on a professional killer with nothing but courage and scatterguns. We all did it, the whole town. That's what makes us strong, not any one person, but all of us together. A figure approached from the darkness, Cross, now wearing a deputy's badge that Caleb had offered, and he'd accepted. Thought you should know, the federal marshals will be here tomorrow. They're bringing something else too. A special commendation from the president himself for the town's courage in standing against corruption and murder. Eleanor smiled. From a destroyed mining town to presidential recognition, Henry would be amazed. No, Caleb said thoughtfully. I think he'd have expected it. He saw something special in this place. In you. That's why he fought so hard to protect it. As they walked back toward town, Eleanor noticed something different. The fear that had lingered since the mudslide was finally gone. Silvervale had faced destruction twice and survived both times. They'd proven that good people standing together could overcome evil, no matter how well-funded or well-armed it might be. Christmas came a week later, celebrated with more joy than the town had felt in years. The school children performed a nativity play in the rebuilt church. Miners sang carols in multiple languages. Mrs. Chen prepared a feast that brought together American, Chinese, Mexican, and European traditions in a uniquely Silvervale celebration. Eleanor and Caleb hosted dinner for those without families, Cross, some of the single miners, a few widows from the slide. As she served the meal, Eleanor thought about the strange path that had brought her here. She'd left Boston as a proper governess, expecting to become a miner's wife. Instead, she'd become a fighter for justice, a defender of the innocent, and the wife of a sheriff who'd found redemption in protecting others. Next year, she announced, raising her glass of wine, we build a proper hospital and a library. This town deserves more than just survival. It deserves to thrive. Here, here! The gathering cheered, and Eleanor saw in their faces not just agreement, but determination. They would build those things and more. They would make Silvervale a beacon of civilization in the wilderness, proof that communities could overcome any tragedy if they stood together. Later that night, as snow began to fall, rare for the Arizona territory but not unheard of, Eleanor and Caleb stood on their porch watching it dust the town in white. It covered the scars of violence, the memories of mud and death, like a promise of new beginnings. I love you, Eleanor said suddenly, the words still feeling new and precious on her lips. And I love you, Caleb replied, pulling her closer. Thank you for not giving up on this place, on me. Thank you for showing me I was stronger than I knew. A figure moved through the snow, Cross, patrolling as he'd volunteered to do so others could celebrate with their families. He touched his hat to them as he passed, a guardian in the night. The town slept peacefully, protected by those who'd learned that safety wasn't given but earned, not through violence but through courage, community, and the willingness to stand for what was right. Eleanor thought of Henry buried beneath the mountain that had claimed him. His sacrifice hadn't been in vain. From his death had come revelation of corruption, justice for the murdered, and ultimately the forging of a community that would never again be victim to those who thought might made right. He would be proud, she whispered to the night. Who? Caleb asked. Henry. He would be proud of what we've built from the ruins. Not just built, Caleb corrected, what we're still building. This is just the beginning, Eleanor. Silvervale's best days are ahead. As if in response, the church bell began to ring, not in alarm but in celebration. Someone had decided midnight deserved marking, the passage from one day to the next, from past to future. Others took up the call, picks banging on metal, voices raised in song, dogs barking in excitement. The whole town came alive with sound, a joyous cacophony that spoke of life refusing to be silenced. Eleanor and Caleb joined in, their voices adding to the chorus. They sang for the dead and the living, for justice served and peace protected, for love found in unexpected places and communities forged in crisis. They sang for Silvervale, the town that died and was reborn, the place where a mail-order bride became a warrior for justice, where a broken ranger found redemption, and where the meek inherited the earth by refusing to remain meek. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the desert in impossible white, transforming the landscape into something magical. And in that transformed world, anything seemed possible, even happiness built on the foundations of tragedy, even hope growing from the soil of despair. Spring arrived in Silvervale with a vengeance of wildflowers, as if the desert itself had decided to celebrate the town's survival. The mountains that had brought such death now bloomed with purple lupine and golden poppies, their beauty a testament to nature's ability to heal even the deepest wounds. Eleanor stood at the window of the new hospital, watching Dr. Harrison direct the placement of medical equipment that had arrived from San Francisco. The building was modest but sturdy, built with funds from the mining company and donations from grateful families whose loved ones had survived the slide. "Mrs. Mercer," a voice called from behind her. She turned to find Judge Patterson holding a thick envelope marked with federal seals. "This just arrived on the morning stage. It's addressed to you specifically." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she opened it, aware that official correspondence rarely brought good news. But as she read, her eyes widened with disbelief. "They're coming here," she breathed. "A congressional committee investigating mining disasters and criminal conspiracies in the territories. They want to hear our testimony, to use Silvervale as an example for new federal mining safety laws." "When?" the judge asked. 3 weeks. They're bringing journalists from Eastern newspapers." She looked up at him, understanding the implications. This could change everything, not just for us, but for mining towns across the country. Word spread quickly through town, and with it came a mixture of hope and apprehension. The last time outsiders had descended on Silvervale in numbers, it had nearly destroyed them. But this was different. This was their chance to ensure that what happened here would never happen again anywhere else. Caleb found Eleanor at the cemetery that evening, standing before Henry's memorial. The simple stone marker had been replaced with a proper headstone, paid for by the miners whose lives he'd saved. Fresh flowers lay at its base. Eleanor brought them weekly, sometimes daily, when the weight of all that had happened pressed too heavily. "The whole town's talking about the committee," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Some are worried it'll bring up too many painful memories." "Those memories deserve to be heard," Eleanor replied. "Every child who died in that schoolhouse, every miner trapped in the dark, their stories need to be told so it never happens again." "And if they ask about us? About you coming here as a mail-order bride and ending up married to the sheriff instead?" Eleanor turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. "Then I'll tell them the truth. That sometimes fate has plans we can't foresee. That Henry's death, horrible as it was, brought justice to light and saved countless future lives." She touched his scarred cheek gently, and that love can bloom even in the ashes of tragedy. Over the next weeks, Silvervale transformed itself with purposeful energy. Buildings were painted, streets cleared of the last debris from the slide. The survivors wanted to show the committee and journalists not just a town that had survived disaster, but one that had thrived despite it. Mrs. Chen organized the women to prepare accommodations, while Jim Morrison and the miners rehearsed their testimonies about the night of the slide and Henry's heroism. But not everyone was pleased about the attention. Samuel Cross, who'd settled into his role as deputy with surprising ease, brought troubling news one evening. "Riders coming in from the south," he reported to Caleb. 4 of them, trying to look like cowboys but carrying too much iron for honest work. "More of Worthington's people?" Eleanor asked. "Don't think so. These have a different feel. Government men, maybe, or private investigators. Someone doesn't want this committee hearing certain testimonies." The strangers took rooms at a boarding house on the far side of town, keeping to themselves, but watching everything. Eleanor noticed them particularly interested in her movements, following at a distance when she went about her daily business. It was Catherine Moore all over again, but this time she was ready. "They're not here to hurt us," Caleb determined after observing them for 2 days. "They're gathering information, looking for something specific." The answer came unexpectedly from Western Union. The telegraph operator, young Tommy Martinez, ran to find Eleanor at the school where she was helping prepare for the committee's visit. "Ma'am, this came through marked urgent and private." He handed her the message with wide eyes. "It's from Boston." Eleanor's blood chilled as she read. It was from her sister Margaret, whom she hadn't heard from since leaving to marry Henry. The message was brief but alarming. Father's papers revealed irregularities. Morrison Mining Company investigating. They say Henry embezzled funds. Lawyers coming to Silvervale. Guard yourself. Embezzlement? Eleanor said aloud, disbelief and anger warring in her voice. Henry? She found Caleb immediately, showing him the telegram. His face darkened as he read. This is why those men are here. Someone's trying to discredit Henry posthumously, make him the villain instead of the victim. But why now? Why when the committee is coming? To muddy the waters. If they can paint Henry as a thief, then maybe Worthington and the others were just recovering stolen property. It changes the entire narrative. Eleanor felt rage building in her chest. It wasn't enough that they'd murdered Henry. Now they wanted to destroy his memory, his legacy. We need those company books Henry kept. He was meticulous about records. They returned to what had been Henry's house, now rebuilt and occupied by a new family. With permission, they searched the root cellar that had survived the slide, finding a metal box Henry had hidden there. Inside were ledgers, receipts, and correspondence that painted a very different picture than embezzlement. Look at this, Eleanor said, pointing to entries in Henry's careful handwriting. He was documenting irregularities, but not his own. Someone at Morrison Mining was skimming from the miners' wages, shorting them on equipment costs and pocketing the difference. And Henry found out, Caleb concluded. That's another reason they wanted him dead. Cross appeared in the doorway, having followed them. Company's coming. Those 4 riders are heading this way with a 5th man. Looks like a city lawyer type. They emerged from the cellar to find the men waiting. The lawyer, a thin man with cold eyes behind wire spectacles, stepped forward. Mrs. Mercer, I'm James Whitmore from Morrison Mining Company. We need to discuss your late fiancé's theft of company funds. Henry stole nothing, Eleanor said firmly, clutching the ledgers. But someone at your company did, and Henry documented it all. Whitmore's expression didn't change. Those documents are company property. I'll need you to surrender them immediately. They're evidence in a federal investigation, Caleb interjected, his hand resting on his gun. They stay with us until the committee arrives. I have a court order, Whitmore began, reaching into his jacket. From what court? Judge Patterson's voice cut through the tension as he approached with several armed miners. Because I'm the only recognized judicial authority in this town, and I haven't issued any such order. Whitmore's composure finally cracked slightly. The territorial court in Prescott has no jurisdiction over evidence in a federal investigation, Patterson continued. Now, you and your men are welcome to stay until the committee arrives and present your case to them, but any attempt to seize or destroy evidence will be met with arrest. Do I make myself clear? The lawyer retreated, but Eleanor knew this wasn't over. That night, she and Caleb took turns standing watch, the ledgers locked in the sheriff's office safe. Around midnight, Cross caught 2 of Whitmore's men trying to break in through the back window. The sound of gunfire woke the town, though no one was hit. Cross had fired warning shots that sent the would-be thieves running. They're desperate, Cross observed, watching the men flee into the darkness. Desperate men make mistakes. The mistake came the next morning. Tommy Martinez, the telegraph operator, brought Eleanor another message, but this one was different. Mr. Whitmore sent this to San Francisco last night, he said quietly. Thought you should see it before I transmitted it. Eleanor read the telegram and smiled grimly. Whitmore was reporting to his superiors that the situation was contained and the evidence would be eliminated before the committee arrival. It was signed with his name and position. Tommy, this is tampering with the telegraph, Eleanor said carefully. You could get in trouble. The young man straightened his shoulders. My papa died in that slide, ma'am. If these people are trying to blame Mr. Henry for their crimes after they murdered him, then I want to help stop them. Eleanor made a decision. Send the telegram exactly as written, but also send a copy to the federal prosecutor in San Francisco with a note about attempted evidence tampering. 3 days before the committee was due to arrive, Silvervale received unexpected visitors. A group of miners from other territories, Colorado, Nevada, even California, began arriving. They'd heard about the congressional investigation and came to add their voices to share their own stories of mining companies' cruel indifference to workers' lives. Among them was an older man with piercing blue eyes and silver-streaked beard who introduced himself as Patrick O'Malley from the Comstock Lode. "Lost 37 men in a fire 2 years back," he told Eleanor. "Company sealed the mine to save the silver, trapped men still alive inside. We've been fighting for justice ever since." "Why come here?" Eleanor asked. "Because what you did here, exposing the conspiracy, fighting back, winning, it gives the rest of us hope. If Silvervale could get justice, maybe we can too." The night before the committee arrived, Whitmore made his final play. He appeared at Eleanor and Caleb's door with what he claimed was new evidence, a signed confession from one of Henry's subordinates stating that Henry had ordered him to falsify records. Eleanor read the document and laughed, actually laughed in Whitmore's face. "This is supposedly from Mike Garrett." "Yes, he signed it before he died in the slide." "Mike Garrett couldn't write his own name, Mr. Whitmore. He made his mark with an X on all documents. Henry was teaching him to read." She held up the forged confession. "This signature is perfect, too perfect for a man who is illiterate." Whitmore's face went pale as he realized his crucial mistake. Caleb stepped forward. "Forging evidence in a federal investigation is a serious crime, Whitmore. You're under arrest." The lawyer tried to run but didn't get far. Cross was waiting outside with a rifle, and the 4 hired men had already been surrounded by miners who'd had enough of outsiders trying to destroy their town's truth. The congressional committee arrived the next morning on a special train that also carried journalists from the New York Times, Harper's Weekly, and several other Eastern publications. The committee chairman, Senator Marcus Webb from Pennsylvania, was a stern-faced man with a reputation for thoroughness and intolerance of corruption. The hearings were held in the rebuilt church, the only building large enough to hold everyone who wanted to testify. Eleanor was called first, and she told the story from the beginning: her correspondence with Henry, her arrival to find devastation, the discovery of the conspiracy, the fight for justice. She presented Henry's ledgers, the documents they'd found, Whitmore's attempted forgery. "Mrs. Mercer," Senator Webb said when she finished, "you've painted a picture of corporate malfeasance that goes beyond simple greed to outright murder. These are serious allegations." "They're not allegations, Senator. They're facts. 73 people died because wealthy men wanted to steal a silver mine. Charles Worthington hanged for it. Edward Harland died fleeing justice. The evidence is overwhelming." One by one, the survivors testified. Jim Morrison spoke of Henry's heroism, how he'd gone back to save others. Mrs. Chen described the town's destruction and resurrection. Dr. Harrison detailed the injuries, the deaths, the children crushed in the schoolhouse. Even Cross testified, revealing Thomas Worthington's murders in Columbia, establishing a pattern of corporate violence. But it was Josiah Wells who provided the day's most dramatic moment. The old miner stood before the committee with tears streaming down his weathered face. "I've been digging in these mountains for 30 years, he said. "Seen men die from cave-ins, explosions, bad air. Always told ourselves it was the price of progress. But this weren't no accident, weren't no act of God. This was murder, plain and simple. And if the federal government don't do something about it, there'll be more Silvervales, more dead children, more widows. How many have to die before someone says enough?" The journalist scribbled frantically. The committee members exchanged troubled looks. Senator Webb called a recess. During the break, Eleanor found herself surrounded by reporters wanting her story, the mail-order bride who became a crusader for justice. She answered their questions carefully, always bringing focus back to the victims, to Henry's sacrifice, to the town's courage. "Mrs. Mercer," a reporter from Harper's asked, "do you regret coming west? If you'd known what awaited you, would you have stayed in Boston?" Eleanor looked across the church to where Caleb stood talking with the committee members, his badge catching the light. She thought of Henry's grave on the hillside, of the children playing in the rebuilt school, of the town that had become her home. "Every choice we make leads us somewhere," she said. "I came here to marry a good man, and though I never met him in life, Henry Blackwell's goodness shaped everything that followed. His death exposed a conspiracy that might have killed thousands more. His courage inspired a town to fight back. So no, I don't regret coming. This is where I was meant to be." When the hearings resumed, Senator Webb announced that Whitmore and his men would be turned over to federal authorities for prosecution. Morrison Mining Company would face a full investigation. More importantly, the committee would recommend new federal laws governing mine safety and corporate accountability. What happened in Silvervale must never happen again, Webb declared. This committee will ensure that the deaths here were not in vain. The crowd erupted in applause. Eleanor felt Caleb's hand find hers, squeezing tight. They'd done it. They'd turned their tragedy into change that would protect countless others. That evening, Silvervale celebrated with a feast in the town square. The congressional committee members stayed to participate, sharing meals with miners and their families, listening to their stories, understanding that these weren't just statistics but real people with hopes and dreams and fears. Patrick O'Malley raised a glass in toast. To Silvervale, the town that died and was reborn. To Henry Blackwell, who saved lives with his death. And to Eleanor Mercer, who showed us all that one person standing for truth can change the world. Eleanor stood to respond, emotion thick in her voice. The truth is that no one person did this. It was all of us together. That's what makes us strong. When they tried to bury us, they didn't know we were seeds, and from our tragedy has grown something beautiful, hope for every mining town, every worker, every family that deserves safety and justice. As the celebration continued into the night, Eleanor slipped away to visit Henry's grave. The moon was full, casting silver light across the cemetery. She knelt beside the headstone, placing fresh wildflowers she'd gathered that morning. "We did it, Henry," she whispered. "Your truth is known. Your sacrifice meant something. The men who killed you have faced justice, and laws will change because of what happened here." She touched the cold stone gently. "I hope wherever you are, you know that you're remembered not as a victim, but as a hero." Footsteps approached, and she knew without looking it was Caleb. He knelt beside her, adding his own flowers to her bouquet. "I never thanked him," Caleb said quietly, "for trusting me with you, for believing I could protect this town." "He saw who you really were," Eleanor replied, "just like he saw who I could become." Henry had a gift for seeing people's potential. They stood together, hands linked, looking out over the valley. The lights of Silvervale twinkled below, more lights than before the slide, as new families arrived seeking opportunity in the revitalized town. The Silver Hope mine operated 3 shifts now, with proper safety measures and fair wages. The school had expanded to 2 rooms. The hospital treated patients from throughout the territory. "Do you think he knows?" Eleanor asked. "About us? About how everything turned out?" Caleb pulled her close. "I think wherever heroes go when they die, Henry Blackwell is at peace knowing the people he loved are happy, and the town he died protecting thrives." A shooting star streaked across the desert sky, and Eleanor made a wish, not for herself but for every town like Silvervale, every worker facing danger, every family hoping for justice. The congressional committee would leave tomorrow, the journalists would file their stories, and the world would know what happened here. But more than that, they'd know what rose from the ashes, a community that refused to be broken, love that bloomed despite loss, and proof that ordinary people could stand against extraordinary evil and win. As they walked back toward town, Eleanor noticed new construction on the hill, the frame of what would become a library, funded by donations that had poured in after the first newspaper stories. She'd insisted it be named the Henry Blackwell Memorial Library, a place where knowledge would combat ignorance, where truth would be preserved for future generations. "The committee chairman asked me something interesting today," Caleb said as they reached their house. "He wanted to know if I'd consider working with them, helping investigate mining disasters in other territories." Eleanor's heart clenched. "Would you have to leave Silvervale?" "We'd have to leave," he corrected. "He wants both of us. Says we make a good team, that our experience here could help save lives elsewhere." Eleanor considered this. Part of her wanted to stay, to continue building the life they'd fought so hard to create. But another part, the part that had found strength in fighting for justice, recognized the opportunity to help others as they'd been helped. "Can we think about it?" she asked. "Of course. We have time to decide." That night, as they lay in bed listening to the desert wind, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here. She'd left Boston seeking a simple life as a miner's wife. Instead, she'd found herself at the center of a battle between good and evil, weakness and strength, despair and hope. She'd lost the man she'd planned to marry, but found a love she hadn't expected. She'd seen a town destroyed and helped rebuild it stronger than before. "Caleb?" she whispered in the darkness. "Hmm?" "I think we should do it. Help the committee, I mean. Henry saved 4 men by going back into that mine. Maybe we can save hundreds, thousands by preventing disasters before they happen." She felt him smile against her hair. "I was hoping you'd say that, though I'll miss this place." "We'll come back," Eleanor said with certainty. "Silvervale is our home. It's where our story began. But maybe our story is bigger than just this town. Maybe what happened here was preparing us for something more." The next morning, as the committee's train prepared to depart, Senator Webb formally offered them positions as special investigators. They would travel the territories, examining mining operations, investigating accidents, recommending reforms. It was dangerous work. They'd be challenging powerful interests, but it was necessary work. Eleanor and Caleb accepted, with the provision that they could return to Silvervale between assignments. The town gathered to see them off, not with sadness, but with pride. Their Eleanor, their sheriff, would be protecting miners across the west. Mrs. Chen pressed a package into Eleanor's hands. "For luck," she said. Inside was a small silk pouch containing soil from Silvervale, a reminder of where they came from and what they fought for. Jim Morrison shook Caleb's hand firmly. "Henry would be proud. You're continuing his work just on a bigger scale." As the train pulled away, Eleanor stood on the rear platform, watching Silvervale grow smaller in the distance. But she wasn't leaving, not really. She was carrying the town's spirit with her, its resilience and courage. It's proof that good people standing together could overcome any evil. Cross, who'd agreed to serve as sheriff in Caleb's absence, raised his hand in farewell. The town would be safe in his capable hands. And when Eleanor and Caleb returned, as they would again and again over the years, they'd find it thriving, growing, becoming the beacon of civilization they'd all dreamed it could be. The train curved around a bend and Silvervale disappeared from view. But Eleanor didn't look back with sadness. She looked forward with hope, her hand in Caleb's, ready for whatever challenges awaited. They'd face death and conspiracy, loss and betrayal, and emerge stronger. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, carrying with them the lessons of a town that refused to die and the memory of a good man whose sacrifice had changed everything.